Over the last 25 years, I've had the privilege of interviewing and highlighting some truly interesting people. Everyone who is anyone, both the famous and the infamous. From presidents and their first ladies to kings and queens. Movie stars and pop stars, captains of industry, heads of state, sports personalities, innovative entrepreneurs, and some pretty fascinating everyday people. Today, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Ann Schafer, a clinical psychologist and professor emerita who is a trailblazer with a risk-taking attitude. Her personal motto is heal trauma to soothe the soul. This is exactly what I need on a day like today. Just to walk in the spirit and get my soul soothed. So I am coming right to you as a curious interviewer today, Dr. Schafer. What led you to want to become a clinical psychologist?
Well, actually, when I walked into the counselor at my college, I was just interested in being a physician. And in those days, Star, you'll probably remember people talking about how it wasn't easy for women to get into the medical community. So I did the next best thing. I signed up for psychology. I signed up for classes, doing my prerequisites, and then I transferred to UC Davis, where I finished up my prerequisites. Again, nobody encouraged me. They said, oh, well, you'll have to take physics. And I said, okay, sign me up for physics. I got an A. Well, but that wasn't all. Of course, there was a lot of hard classwork to do. I always had my eye on what made people tick, what made them do what they do, and think how they think, and feel how they feel, and just act the way that they do, including myself, of course.
So, looking through your resume, it really looks like you started out in education. So, did you always see yourself transitioning into psychology from there, or did the pivot come about as a result of the experiences that you've had?
Well, I think that I actually graduated from University of California, Davis with a psychology degree. The master's in education came later because I was a single parent, as it turns out, two daughters, and they kind of wanted breakfast and lunch and dinner. So I said, what can I get a degree in that will put food on the table? And that was teaching. So I got my master's in education, and I got a job teaching in Davis, California, where I was for many, many years, 20 years. Then I got an offer to go to the community college system, and that was really a chance of a lifetime, because I had gotten kind of known for doing special needs people in my classrooms. Anybody that had any kind of learning problem was sent to me, because I would do things that would work, but they would be unusual, and I would try to find the people that knew what to do and then learn from them. So I did start out with education, but it was always a combination of education and psychology, knowing that we're whole people. We don't just have one part of us that learns and one part of us that has problems. We're just all one person. So I always sought holistic answers.
That's smart, very smart. Now, again, I am a student, so I'm reading up on you. Tell me a little bit about your work with the National Literacy Coalition.
Well, that came when I went to Sacramento City College, and thank you for asking that. I really enjoyed that work. One of my colleagues came to me, and again, I'm kind of known for these special needs people, adults or children. And so she said, I think you ought to write this column, and we're going to give some of those methods to the people that can reach more people. We were an international literacy coalition. It turns out we were sent to every library and every Laubach tutoring center around the world. And so I had a column called Ask Dr. Ann about basic skills and learning. So I got questions from all over the world, especially, of course, the United States, but as far away as Manila and as close as, every state in the Union. And so I answered questions for people that would not be able to answer them on their own, or to highlight things they were interested in, like attention deficit disorder. That still remains the most favorite chapter in my book. And we do have a book that is a collection of the 27 articles that I wrote in about 4 years for the National Literacy Coalition. I was very supported by the Literacy Coalition, and they were very happy with me, and I was very happy with them because I learned from my students.
Yes, and that's the best relationship that a teacher and student can have, is that there is some mutual learning going on. When I introduced you today, I used two phrases, trailblazer and risk taker. So how do you feel that being a trailblazer and a risk taker has actually contributed to your success?
Well, I actually never thought of it as risk-taking or trailblazing. I just thought I was doing a good job. If it didn't work and I needed to find something else, I didn't think it was a risk. I thought it was a duty. I thought that a good teacher finds whatever needs to happen and learns from colleagues and collaborates and networks. So did I take risks? Well, the risk of doing a good job or a better job and asking my colleagues for help, I don't know. I don't consider that a risk, but I did get known as somebody who would go stand up for students because we were the first community college to come about when the invisible learning disabilities were put into the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and nobody knew how to deal with that. You could deal with a wheelchair or a white cane, but what's the equivalent for people with learning disorders that have the same rights? So we had to teach teachers, the college professors who did not want to do accommodations that we recommended. There were a couple of risks actually that came up. Can I give you an example?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, there was one student that was tested for learning disabilities, and he transferred from our city college to UC Berkeley, where the accommodations that we had given him at City College were not going to be honored at UC Berkeley by the math professor. Things like a calculator. Now, we probably can't even imagine it not being an accommodation. Everybody uses it today. But in those days, you had to mandate that somebody allow this student to have more time to use a calculator. And this math teacher said, no, not in my class. We're not going to do that in my class. And he was the risk taker, it turns out. But we said, yeah, we made those accommodations, and he did fine as long as he had the extra time and the accommodations. Well, he went all the way, said no, all the way to the provost and all the way through the union. And everybody told him, you got to do it. It's ADA. It's Americans with Disabilities Act, and it's the law. Well, it turns out this student's mother was an attorney.
Uh-oh.
You'll appreciate that.
So now we get involved. That's it.
Oh, and so then, of course, I think that the math professor ended up paying for the college career of that student. Well, that was a fun story, but I didn't have to take the risk, but I did have to speak up for my student.
And that's a wonderful thing to know. I mean, I love hearing these stories. Tell me a little bit more about your work with the special needs group.
Well, we were able to do a lot of innovation in the field of disability work, and we did things like pioneered the reading machines, the Kurzweil reading machines. That was one of the first. Now everybody uses Otter for amanuensis, or they use note-taking, reading books on tape. That's just normal now, but that was an accommodation in my early days. So I think that there were so many things that working with special needs turned out to be very good for everybody. It's not really like that anymore. Now, extra time on exams still is an issue for some people, but we just put them in quiet rooms, we give them extra time, and then they perform. Turns out only the students with learning disorders needed the extra time, and that was proven by a lot of experiments that were done. So we were very happy to be trailblazers in that regard. Yes, it turned out to be good for everyone.
And I tend to, because I've worked in the diversity and inclusion space for
Mhm.
so many years. And this is a diverse group that needs to be counted at the table when you're talking about inclusiveness. And I always tend to think of them not as disabled, but differently abled, because I have found that people with special or additional needs can do really, really well in certain things that I can't even hold a candle to. And so, differently able actually describes many more people than disabled. Differently abled. I have a one of my girlfriend's sons is a math genius. He doesn't need a calculator. Yet he would, quote, be described on the spectrum. But I tell you what, you sit him down at a desk and he is in charge of data, you're going to get some of the best work ever. And so, differently able can actually be a superstar, if you know what I mean.
Oh, do I ever? We had to do a manual for our community college teachers and send it statewide to all the community colleges just to do a training to teach people. It's not necessarily, this is not something that is going to be out of the ordinary. It's going to get this person into a job where it usually doesn't make any difference if you have an accommodation. It's, in fact, a good employer always has accommodations, and it's pretty common now. But we were real happy. In fact, that's what we called our training manual, was Learning Disabilities Handbook, but we crossed out the dis and put differently, learning differently. Exactly what you did. See, you're right
Oh,
up
so I was a little bit of a trailblazer myself.
there. Yes. And you probably have noticed that if you have a friend with a son that has these conditions, the grief issue is what really brought the psychology in, because kids that have invisible disabilities never feel like they're enough.
Ah, okay.
They sabotage themselves.
Hmm.
They are criticized by not just themselves, but parents who don't understand, sometimes teachers. And then they have this grief, which is a cumulative grief. Every year it gets a little worse and a little worse and a little worse. So that's where the self-soothing comes in, and where I developed some programs recently to help not just people with disabilities, but mostly it came out of my work with special needs. Everybody has special needs when it comes to grief, right now, especially.
Oh, 100%. And I think that this is such a topic of discussion and interest, because we've all just come through this pandemic, and it does not seem to be dissipating. And I've seen so many young people, especially, enter into depressions because we need social contact. We need to feel wanted and needed and accepted. And I found that a lot of young people really have suffered throughout this pandemic because of that loss of personal contact. You know, this whole concept of social distancing. We should understand about physical distancing, but not social distancing. Social distancing is different.
It's really difficult, and that's why I'm so excited about this humanitarian award, because we have developed a nonprofit organization that is going to pay for the classes for the students to learn how to write their own play about their own hidden subpersonalities that are born out of unmet childhood needs. The critic becomes, they can write their own play. We have something called the inner playbook, the inner called inner theater playbook, where you have your own actors. Well, Shakespeare said it, all the world's a stage and all the
Yes.
men and women are players in it.
Hmm.
So we are doing for teens, whose the suicide rate is up 50% for teens. And also for single mothers. I'm never going to leave single mothers out, because I was one and I will never forget it. But we have scholarships for people to do our online course that develops their inner theater abilities, and they learn to work in a group to actually produce, direct, and act in their own play that they write in a group. It's good. It's exciting. It's exciting what people will find. And we, of course, do coaching. We,
Mm-hmm.
of course, do some therapeutic types of exercises that help them soothe their own soul. Self-soothing is a very good thing to have in the playbook. And so if you have a critic that becomes a good coach, you're miles ahead. You have your own inner director. You have, I tell them, put yourself up in the bleachers like you're directing a basketball game, or you're going to do your play. You're in the director's chair. You get to write the play. You get to produce it. You get to direct how you want it to come out. And then you get to make your saboteur a good collaborator. And you get to network, and you get to write these things that should happen. But they learn the tools along with writing their own play.
Really, really, really interesting. Absolutely. And speaking of a playbook, I understand you're the author of an upcoming book. What can you tell me about that?
Well, this one is, this is my heart. This is my heart. It's called Soul Growth. And this is a Soul Growth Solutions. And this is exactly where this work came from. Dr. Roberto Assagioli was a friend of Carl Jung. You probably heard of Carl Jung more than you have Assagioli. But he developed this whole idea of unmet childhood needs become complexes. They become defenses. So because, like I said, the critic, and even Jack Canfield in his Chicken Soup for the Soul, talks of, and his principles of success talks about how you can make your critic, your inner critic, become your best coach. And you can also ask your friends for help with coaching. So these are so practical that, as Assagioli did in the, his work was mostly in the early to mid 1900s, but he and Carl Jung changed the world. And so being able to go back to his work and see what's been done with it and see where we can go with it to help the teens and the single moms in particular. We wanted to have scholarships so that they would not have to pay, the price. Well, maybe they'd have a deep discount, but they would definitely learn some of the outdoor bound courses would, have this available then to their teen clients. So we're happy about being able to be part of what turned out to be a humanitarian noticed award. Thank you very much.
Congratulations indeed. Before we go, I'd love to devote just a little bit of time to a concept that I know is important to you, psychosynthesis. Can you take us through the basics of that?
Absolutely. And I really appreciate that. That's a hard word to understand, say, pronounce, and then just the whole thing didn't make sense to us to say psychosynthesis. So we changed it. We said it's soul growth. Psycho means soul, synthesis, bringing it all together, understanding yourself. Who are you? What is your purpose on the planet? So psychosynthesis is soul growth, and it's learning what your subpersonalities are, born out of unmet childhood needs, or, maybe your roles that you have. Everybody has roles, as Shakespeare said. Are you the good mother? Are you the Mad Hatter? Are you the queen? Are you the victim that needs to become an empowered survivor? Are you a rebel? Everybody has a rebel in them. In fact, they're doing specials on TV about the rebels right now. So I'll tell you, if you can become a good negotiator, you don't have to be a rebel, and you can learn the skills. Just learn the skills. So psychosynthesis was Assagioli's, that's another hard word, Assagioli's baby. And he actually developed this whole internal family system himself and called it psychosynthesis. It does make sense when you study it, but it's a hard word. So we just said, let's call it what it is, soul growth.
I like soul growth. I can say that all the
You
time.
can remember that.
Yes, I can. Also, Dr. Schafer, as we close here, tell me what's the one thing you'd like the viewer of the video feature to walk away with?
I would like the viewer of the or the reader of the book or the viewer of the online classes, I would like them to walk away with knowing what their purpose is on the planet. You learn that in soul growth. You learn who you are. You learn what is a product of maybe the critic or the saboteur, and not the real you, because you have a critic. You are not your critic. So you have a mind, but you're not your mind. And also Jolie said this, you're not your body. You have a body, and that gets you around the planet. So I want them to know you have emotions, but you're not your emotions. You use them. These are all your GPS systems to get you around and do better on the planet. So what's your purpose, and what are your barriers, and what are your helps?
Wonderful, wonderful. So am looking forward to learning more and more myself, doing a little more investigative journalism, and I encourage others to do the same thing. Dr. Schafer, thank you so much for the conversation.
Oh, thank you. So nice to talk with you.
You too.